Remember those middle school history classes? Glossy textbooks, enthusiastic teachers, and tales of ancient wonders, brave Spartans, godlike conquistadors, and the pyramids built by suffering slaves. That image of thousands of slaves whipped into building the pyramids, Hollywood and textbooks made it iconic. But what if I told you that story is almost entirely wrong? The truth is far more complex, and way more interesting. Today we're busting that myth and 6 more you probably learned in school. Get ready to have your history ruined. Let's start with the Great Pyramids of Giza, the classic story armies of slaves forced to build tombs for the pharaohs. But archaeologists have found no evidence of a massive slave population. Instead, they uncovered a purpose-built city for workers, complete with houses, bakeries, breweries, and even a medical center. These weren't slaves. They were skilled Egyptian laborers, mostly farmers working during the Nile's flood season when their fields were underwater. This was national service, not slavery, a labor tax called Corvée, and they were well fed. Excavations show they ate prime cuts of meat and were paid in bread and beer. The slaves built the pyramids myth comes from Herodotus, a Greek historian writing 2,000 years later, and was reinforced by later religious traditions. But the evidence shows these workers had rights, pride, and even left graffiti with team names like the Drunkards of Menkaure. They could even strike. Records show the world's first labor strike happened in ancient Egypt when rations were late. These were valued workers, not disposable slaves. The real story? The pyramids were built by skilled, respected Egyptians, not by the suffering masses of Hollywood legend. So next time you see a movie with slaves dragging stones, remember, it's just good drama, not good history. The truth is, the pyramids were a national project, one that united Egypt, not divided it. And yes, beer was basically their paycheck. The myth of slave labor is just that, a myth. The real builders were proud, organized, and essential to Egypt's greatness. History is always more interesting when you dig a little deeper. Let's move on to our next myth. Next up, the infamous curse of King Tutankhamun's tomb. The legend says anyone who entered the tomb was doomed by a deadly curse. But the truth? The curse was invented by journalists hungry for headlines. When Howard Carter discovered the tomb in 1922, newspapers ran wild with stories of a curse despite no such inscription ever being found. The supposed curse inscription? Pure fiction. The real fuel for the myth was Lord Carnarvon's death from an infected mosquito bite. Tragic, but not supernatural. Out of 58 people present at the tomb's opening, only 8 died within a decade. Hardly a curse. Howard Carter himself lived for 16 more years. The curse was a media sensation, not an ancient reality. The real story is about the power of the press to create legends that outlast the facts. No vengeful mummies, just a century-old case of viral clickbait. Sometimes the scariest thing in history is a good headline. Let's bust another myth. When you think of Sparta, you probably picture the movie 300. Ripped warriors, brutal training, and the infamous story of weak babies thrown off cliffs. But is there any real evidence for this? Not really. The main source is Plutarch, a Roman writing 700 years after the events he described. Archaeologists have searched the supposed site and found only adult remains, no infants. The story likely comes from enemy propaganda and later Roman admiration for Spartan toughness. It made Sparta seem monstrous and extreme, but it's not supported by evidence. Infanticide did happen in the ancient world, but the idea of a state-run eugenics program is a myth. The real Sparta was complex and militaristic, but not the baby-killing society of legend. Sometimes the most shocking stories are just that, stories. History is full of exaggerations that become fact. Don't believe everything you see in the movies. On to the next myth. Gladiators. Hollywood says every fight was to the death, with the emperor giving a thumbs down for the kill. But in reality, most gladiator bouts didn't end in death. Gladiators were expensive investments, trained and fed like elite athletes. Owners didn't want to lose them. Killing a gladiator was bad business. Fights were regulated with referees and rules. Gladiators could surrender by raising a finger, and mercy was often granted. The famous thumbs down gesture? We don't even know what it meant. Scholars still debate it. Archaeological evidence shows many gladiators survived multiple fights, with healed injuries but few fatal wounds. Some had careers spanning years and dozens of matches. Death was a risk but not the goal. Gladiators were celebrities, not cannon fodder. The real spectacle was skill, not slaughter. The myth of constant death matches? Pure fiction. The truth, the arena was brutal but survival was common. Sometimes the best show was letting the loser live to fight another day. Let's keep busting myths. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. The ultimate image of clueless leadership. But Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. He rushed back to help. Ancient sources say he organized relief, opened his palaces to the homeless, and brought in food. The fiddling story comes from later historians who hated Nero, and the fiddle didn't even exist yet. If he played anything, it was a lyre, not a violin. The myth stuck because it made for great political propaganda. After the fire, Nero blamed the Christians, but his enemies blamed him. The image of a mad emperor playing music as Rome burned was too good to resist. In reality, Nero was controversial, but not the cartoon villain of legend. History is written by those with an agenda. Sometimes the catchiest stories are the least true. You've heard it. The Aztecs thought Cortés was a god, so they let the Spanish conquer them. But early indigenous accounts don't mention this at all. The Aztecs were cautious and suspicious, not worshipful. They were shocked by Spanish weapons and horses, not convinced of their divinity. The Cortés as Quetzalcoatl story was pushed by the Spanish after the conquest to justify their victory. It made the Aztecs seem naive and the conquest seem inevitable. In reality, the Aztecs fought fiercely, but were undone by disease, Spanish weapons, and alliances with other indigenous groups. The god myth is post-conquest propaganda, not fact. The real story is about politics, war, and strategy, not prophecy. The Aztecs didn't just give up, they were outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. History is rarely as simple as a single myth. The truth is always more complicated. Let's tackle one last myth. Black Tuesday, 1929. The stock market crashes and the Great Depression begins. That's the story, right? But the crash wasn't the cause, it was the symptom. The real problems were deeper. Years of agricultural crisis, massive wealth inequality, and a fragile credit bubble. Farmers were already in recession, banks were failing, and most Americans couldn't afford what they were buying on credit. When the market crashed, it wiped out savings and triggered bank failures. Then bad government decisions, like raising interest rates and starting a trade war, made things worse. The depression was global, not just American. The crash was dramatic, but the economy was already sick. The real lesson? Economic disasters are rarely caused by a single event. It's the slow rot beneath the surface that does the real damage. The crash caused the depression story is just too simple. History is always more complicated than a headline. Don't fall for easy answers. The past is a web, not a straight line. Let's wrap up. That's our deep dive into the lies your history books told you. From pyramid builders to gladiators, the truth is always more complex and more interesting than the myths. These stories shape how we see the world, often making history seem simpler or more dramatic than it really was. Questioning what you've learned is the best way to understand both the past and the present. Thanks for joining me on this myth-busting journey. If you enjoyed it, hit subscribe and let me know your favorite historical myth in the comments. I'm Meninder. See you next time.